Hello everyone, welcome to the show. My name is Amanda Ostrander. I am a teacher-turned-homeschool mom, and this is Raising A to Z, a place where we talk about all things homeschooling normally. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Today we're going to do a little bit of a story time, and I'm going to tell you the true story of how the Ontario government got sued for a human rights violation, all because of their language arts curriculum. So I kind of live in a unique space in the sense that I am both a homeschool parent who actively engages in the homeschool community. I homeschool my own kids. I have that sphere. But then I also live in the education sphere. I am a certified teacher. I went to school to be a teacher. I married a teacher. I have best friends who are teachers. And so I live in this very unique space of both supporting, understanding, and being aware of what's happening in the public education spheres while also being a homeschooler. So I'm living in both spheres, which isn't very common, but it is what it is. It's just a very unique position to be in. And so I heard this story a few years ago. Something came up and it tweaked my interest so quickly, and I saw exactly what it was. And it got me so revved up and so riled up that I was like, I can't believe that no one has discussed this. But, I'm not a commentator on public education. I didn't make anything out of it. But I've talked about it a few times when we've talked about literacy and language arts here on the channel when it comes to homeschooling and stuff. I've talked about this story a little bit. And whenever I bring it up, I get a ton of comments are like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And so I thought today that I would share the story with you. Back in, if you can remember, think back to late 2022, early 2023. Okay. And the Ontario government came out with they announced they were coming out with brand new language arts curriculum. Their curriculum hadn't been updated since 2006. They were coming out with brand new curriculum. It was going to be a back to basics focus. And one of the big things they were doing was bringing back cursive writing. And this sparked a huge debate. This was the thing everyone was worked up about. Should we be doing cursive writing? Is it a waste of classroom time? People believe that, we need to be able to read historical documents. We need to be able to read and write cursive. It became a whole debate in the edu-sphere, in politics at the time in Ontario. And it was this huge thing. I think we can all remember the cursive writing debates. Okay. It was a very interesting time. Because like we said, the government was pitching this as a back to basics approach. It seemed strange to me as well. So I kind of pinged this as a little weird. I understand, having been in teaching for a while, in the edu sphere for a while, that this governments tend to swing. In education, we talk about the pendulum a lot. So on one side, you have teacher focused, which would be lessons that where a teacher stands at the front, they deliver a lesson. It's kind of a lecture style a little bit. It's more focused on the teacher explaining things directly to kids. And then on the other side, you have child-led, which would be very hands-on. Kids are asking the questions. Kids are driving the language and the activities and what they want to learn. And so we have this pendulum. And when you have been through education for a while, you notice these pendulum swings and these pendulum shifts. And we had kind of been where it would make sense to be more kind of in the middle, because kids need to be interested in what they're learning about, but they also need to they don't know what they don't know. So they need to be told, you know what I mean? So we had kind of been in this 2006 curriculum. We had kind of been in this more child-led shift. And I know that because this is when I did my teacher's college. And so it was very much okay, we're going to do problem-based learning and we're going to follow the kids' interests and we're going to do all of these things, was very much what my teacher's training was. And so we had the swing over here, and that tends to be a more liberal government, tends to have these swings. Anyway, we had this more child-led swing. And then of course, because pendulums never just correct themselves a little bit, there's always a swing to the other side. We saw this swing to the back to basics approach of schooling coming. But I pinged it as something different because they had just released a new math curriculum at the time, which was writing new curriculum for grades K through 8 is a massive job. It's not a quick and easy, it's not a cheap thing. It is a huge job. And so think that is weird because they had just done the math. Usually they wait a couple years to do another subject. So the fact that they did the subject the following year, that was a little red flag going up. The fact that they kept focusing on cursive writing and weren't talking about anything else that was changing in the curriculum, that was another little red flag. I said, something's going on here. And so I did a little digging, and this is what it was. So I did a little digging, and this is what it was. The Ontario government had recently been found in violation of the Canadian Charter of Human Rights for their language arts curriculum. That's right. Their language arts curriculum was deemed to be a human rights violation. How is that possible? What am I talking about? Let me explain. Back up. So in 2006, they rewrote the curriculum, right? They came out with a new curriculum document for language arts. And the focus was, again, child-led, but it was focused specifically on a type of literacy teaching program approach called balanced literacy, which sounds lovely. And I've done a whole video talking about what balanced literacy is in detail and what its like opposite is. I'll put the link here. But basically, balanced literacy is an approach that as long as kids are being exposed to language and reading, they will naturally learn how to read. And so the way that it was being taught, because they wanted to move away from like teacher stands at the front and does like phonics lessons, they want to do less teacher directed. They wanted to be more child engaged because engagement was what they thought was going to get kids more into reading and writing and learning. So they moved to this balanced literacy. And the way that plays out in the classroom is it's things like reading groups were huge, read alouds, reading to them. Reading groups is, like I just said, was really, really big. Having kids that was like a big thing. You'd have to divide your kids into like reading groups that by levels and give them books and do discussions and meet with them, like almost like mini book clubs in your class. And the big part of it was that there was to be no direct instruction about things like grammar and phonics. Those are things kids would naturally pick up the more they read. And the more that they were reading and the more they were being read to, the more they would pick these things up. Okay? That's the idea behind balanced literacy. And for the most part, that does work. If you have a very normal, neurotypical child, they will pick up on those things. It's just like, you see the sky is blue 45,000 times, you will notice that the sky is blue kind of thing, right? So it does work. And this is what I was trained in. I never really understood it. And I remember asking my professor, I was like, this just doesn't make sense to me. And they're like, he's like, no, it'll work. It works. It works. So the thing is, it works if you're a very normal, neurotypical child. If you are not, it actively hinders your ability to learn how to read, which is what the organization Dyslexia Canada claimed in their lawsuit. They claimed that by focusing on balanced literacy, the Ontario government was not only holding students back, but it was actively preventing children from being able to learn how to read, because any form of direct instruction was frowned upon. So telling a kid, hey, a PH when they're together makes an F, like an F sound, can't do that. You need to have a period at the end of your sentence. You can't really do that. So there's a lot of things that like kids who have different brains, kids who had different learning disabilities or different learning struggles were falling behind. They're falling drastically behind. And it was because balanced literacy does not help them. It doesn't give them the tools they need in their toolbox to be able to read. And it's because they aren't given the direct instruction. Like their brains will never pick up those kinds of patterns. They'll never pick up that when a P and an H is together, that it's an F sound. It's just not something that their brain can do because their brain is already working so hard to do all the other things. They just won't ever pick it up. And so by not only like not giving them that instruction, but actively like preventing it, because it was very much frowned upon in the classroom at the time, that you couldn't do direct instruction because it was against this like balanced literacy child-led model of learning, you were actively putting roadblocks up and preventing children from being able to read. And so Dyslexia Canada brought it up. They sued the government for it in 2020 or 2021. They brought the first suit. It ended up going to the Human Rights Tribunal for Ontario, and in 2022, February 28th, 2022, the Right to Reading, what's it called? The Right to Reading Inquiry was the actual name of it, was published by the Human Rights Commission of Ontario. And it essentially said that Dyslexia Canada is right. There is not enough evidence, because that's the other thing, was balanced literacy was a very new approach. There's not enough scientific evidence to prove that balanced literacy is an effective classroom tool on a large scale. Whereas the opposite, which is structured literacy, has a proven track record. And its whole plan, essentially, the whole entire curriculum does have things that are actively preventing children with dyslexia and other learning disabilities from being able to read. And so that was a huge thing. That came out, that the human rights violation was true. That because children in Canada have a right to an education, which I don't know if you guys know, it's like a guaranteed right to children. They have a right to an education. And because the government had enacted a public curriculum that was actively preventing these kids from being able to read, it was deemed a right, like a violation of their human rights to an education. And so they were ordered to change the curriculum. And they had already announced at this point that the math curriculum was coming out. So they had like 1 year to get a new curriculum out, which is what happened. But not wanting to really make a big deal out of the reason why they had to write the new curriculum, they decided to make it a big stance on the back to basics, because they had already had some success in the back to basics approach with math, which was moving kind of more to a bit more of a slightly more mastery than just problem solving and child-led. They had moved it back a little bit on pendulum. And so they did this. And so they decided to go with the same idea of, we're going back to the basics. We're bringing back phonics. We're going to do these things. Oh, and we're bringing back cursive. And so cursive was always the red herring. It was designed to get everyone to look this way instead of looking this way, so that no one realized that the reason they were doing this so quickly was that their curriculum for the last 16 years was a human rights violation and that they were in trouble. And so they brought in a new curriculum. It has a lot more structured literacy. And that came in, and it is now in effect. Now, first off, like, how does this affect us as homeschoolers? Number one, it's just interesting. Okay, let's be honest. I think it's always funny when the government gets sued for things that like seem like common sense. Like, why would you take an approach like that is not really scientifically backed, doesn't have a great track record, was kind of known to not be great for students with learning disabilities, and like make that like your province-wide mandated program? I think it's interesting that they got caught, and I always like to see those kind of come up in stories. That's just like a personal interest of mine, okay? But as homeschoolers, this is a really interesting thing for two reasons. Number one, it does show us the importance of evidence-based, scientific-based learning and how we can do best practices. So, for example, while balanced literacy is a great focus, and if you have very neurotypical children, it's awesome. Reading to your kids is awesome. Reading groups is awesome. Reading book clubs is awesome. Those are all great things. But there's nothing wrong with adding some phonics and some grammar work to that, because that is science-based. It's evidence-based that those are best practices. So as homeschoolers, we can definitely engage in that a little bit. We don't want our kids to be falling behind. We don't want in the sense that like, we don't want them to be like 15 years old and unable to read, right? Like, they need to become literate at some point. We want our children to be doing the things that they need to be doing so that they are actually learning. Like, we don't want to be educationally neglecting our children. Like, that's important. But it's also good to know what is worth investing a little bit of time and energy into, right? So investing some time into phonics, into grammar, into reading with our kids. Reading is great, but a lot of kids need that phonics and grammar piece. And so we can kind of embrace more of a structured literacy approach rather than just kind of like, oh, going by the swings of whatever curriculum or government agency or whatever is telling us. We can take a step back and say like, hey, but where is the evidence that this is based in being a successful program? And so that is really important. Looking for programs and things that are based in evidence-based best practices is key. So like, that's important. The other thing that I like to bring up with homeschoolers, because they're like, well, we're not in the system. It doesn't matter. This is kind of a nice thing that I like to say is reassuring to me and to many homeschoolers, that we don't have to worry about these pendulum swings. We don't have to worry about the government's latest whim or fascination or focus. We can just do what's best for our kids. So if you have a kid who, needs a little more phonics, you can do a little more phonics. I have 2 daughters. They do very differently in life. Alexi, we started a phonics-based structured literacy program when she was like 5 or 6, probably 5 and a half. She blew through it in like 3 months and was reading in 2 months, and has never stopped reading since. She went and was fantastic at it. Zoe struggles a little more with reading. She's 7. She is not reading full books on her own yet. And she definitely is a child who needs more phonics based. I can customize my curriculum and do more focus with her on what she needs rather than just like going at the government's whim of like, well, no, we don't do direct lessons anymore. And we don't do structured stuff anymore because it's too boring for the kids. Sometimes you need to get through the boring stuff to do well in life. Like, taxes are boring too. No one likes to do them. You still need to get them done. You know what I'm saying? Phonics isn't exciting. Sorry, it's not. But some kids need those foundations and those tools in their toolkit so that they can be able to decode and read later on. And because we're not going by these pendulum swings of the government, we have the ability to like just do what's best for our kids and customize it to their interests, their abilities. And sometimes that means working on something a little longer. Sometimes it means kind of speeding through and skipping things and just bringing it up when it becomes an issue. And we have that ability to do that without really affecting our children in a negative way. And we aren't lost to the government's newest focus. Like, we can debate all day whether cursive is important or not. That's fine. Some people are of the opinion it's super important. Some people are of the opinion that it's not super important. Here's the thing. It's an opinion. There's very little evidence that shows that cursive is required for life. You can have some opinion on it, but there's very little evidence that shows like it's a necessary part of learning in life. What we do know is that phonics is necessary for most people to learn to read and write very easily. And while cursive is nice, like I taught my kids cursive, it's a nice ability to have. Doesn't necessarily, it's kind of a frustrating thing when they're like, we're going to focus on cursive, but we're going to cut back on all of the phys ed. We're cutting back on, outdoor time. We're cutting back on arts education. Like, we're cutting back on all of these other things so that we can spend more time on language. But don't worry, we're now including cursive, right? Like, it's nice that we don't have to go and cut the things that are going to be the hooks for our kids to get them excited and wanting to pursue learning and things like that. So I just think it's a nice thing to have kind of in your back of your head, in your back pocket, of just like another great reason why homeschooling is awesome. So that is my story. I hope you enjoyed my story time. Let me know if you guys have any other stories you'd like to hear about weird things in education. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you guys follow on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Consider becoming a member because we do lots of cool stuff. And I'll see you guys next week when I start a whole bunch of really cool new content. It's Christmas content. See you guys later. Bye.